Yeah, sure,
Okay.
certainly.
Over to John.
So I sent you a budget presentation. It is similar in a lot of ways to the presentation that we narrated a couple of weeks ago. There are some differences in it. My thought was that it would be helpful for me to go through the slides and briefly talk about each one of them, not read them to you, and then take questions. I think it would be a good idea for you to, if you do have questions, to stop me at the slides, and Robert and I can try to answer those. We also sent you a memo that included some changes from the last time that we had met in the budget, and summative information for the Mount Mansfield Modified Union School District, as well as all the Chittenden East budgets, and what the assessments look like for Triple M and for Huntington. Does that sound like it would be helpful for the board? Okay. So I'll start from the beginning. This is the recommended budget. This is work that the administration and the Finance Committee have undertaken over the last 6 months. And that's what we're going to discuss and hopefully get an approved budget this evening. If you do want budget information, it can all be found at our website, and that's at csu.k12.vt.us. These are the sections in this budget presentation. This is also online for community members and for board members and for school personnel to review and look at. This is our school district. You've seen this slide before. It's been updated. We have been in existence for a little bit over a year, officially established, and this board took over full operations of 8 schools on July 1, 2015. So this is really the first time as a board and as a finance committee that we've gone through from really A to Z the budget process. This is the Finance Committee, folks that have worked diligently over the last several months, asked a lot of good questions, studied a lot of data, and their work and the work of central office folks and our principals and administrators have produced this recommended budget. This is the process. I won't read this to you, but it was an in-depth process of evaluation and analysis and planning over the last 6 months. It started with setting some budget targets in July. We went through a zero-based budget planning with all of our principals. We focused on what the needs of students were, what the needs of each school were, what the goals of the whole overall system are, and what the school-based goals are based on data and what student performance looks like. In addition, transportation and our special ed directors also shared information with the Finance Committee and supported Bob and I in developing those budgets. We reviewed several drafts and the Finance Committee approved a budget to recommend Thursday of last week. These were the targets that we set in July, and I'm pleased to say that we achieved most of them. The exception is the special ed budget. When you separate the special ed budget from K to 12 and pre-K to 12, we actually did achieve the target K to 12. I think it was a 2.36% increase. Because of additional EEE costs, which are students that are ages 3 to 5 and preschool eligible that need to receive special education services, those really pushed up our overall special ed costs. A positive part of this, yes, the costs are going up and they are mandated by the state and federal government, but with the implementation of Act 166, which is universal preschool, we've actually identified more students that do need additional support that are ages 3 to 5. I think that will benefit, number one, the students and the families, but it'll also support schools in better understanding what the educational needs and the social needs of some of these students are, and helping them get them really early on, which we know typically, and there's a lot of good research that indicates that can really support students in reaching their full potential as they matriculate through the K-12 system. Some of these numbers also changed from the chart that you were shown a couple of weeks ago, but we did meet the vast majority of our targets. This shows the enrollment trends for Mount Mansfield Modified and CESU. We are seeing a decline in enrollment. And I say that with a caveat. When you look at pre-K to 12, the actual heads, the people, we are increasing a little bit. But our K to 12 population is shrinking. From 13, 14 to what we're projecting for next year, it's a reduction of about 100 students. But next year, it looks like the decline in enrollment is going to be about 25 students, which is really much less than we've seen over the last 5 or 6 years. So the decline is decreasing. But these are essentially, these are kids that are going through the system, and you can see, we try to use it as a visual to show in elementary, the trend is decreasing. We've made some reductions in response to that and to manage that, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. These are our class size averages. So we meet the school quality standards, and we meet the guidelines of our own policy for class size in all of our schools currently. And these are the numbers with the net 05 FTE that is in this budget. A piece it's important to emphasize is that those reductions are, again, a response to a decline in enrollment on certain grade levels. Yes?
I just want to say this is a really useful slide. I'm really glad we have this in here this time.
Thank you. So for K to 3, it's less than 20. This is average class size per class. And for grades 4 to 12, it's less than 25 students per class, just to give you some context around the numbers. So these are the budget drivers. The way we define budget drivers are the areas that have the greatest influence on either increasing or decreasing the budget. Some of these are probably no surprise, but we do have approximately 41 more preschool partnerships in the budget. Wages and benefits have increased. I got a slide that will specifically reference that. We have a decrease in some staffing and some other increases and decreases, but I can get a little bit more specific on that in some of the slides. Wages were negotiated for this year and next year, a 3.25% increase in salary for this year, and this has been approved by the Green Mountain Care Board as 7.9% increase to the healthcare premium, which is a significant increase, and it's bigger than the increases that we've seen over the last 4 years.
That's across the state.
That's all schools, yeah. Anybody that is part of the Vermont School Board's Insurance Trust, which I think like 98% of the school districts are. This is the breakdown for special education. And then central office, which we provided some summative information to the board. And then transportation. We do have a decrease. A lot of that is driven by a reduction in fuel costs and some savings on supplies and equipment. And then we are going to see lower assessed costs for next year. And that is due to the elimination of deficits in transportation and special education and a surplus carryover in central office and transportation as well. So it's a somewhat of a compounding effect. So the merger, what's the influence of the merger? Well, we are going to get a 6-cent decrease in our tax rate. And that is, however, that's a 2-cent decline from what we had last year. So what that means is that we have essentially a 2-cent increase to the tax rate automatically. We did find some efficiencies. We are getting some additional revenue and some cost savings. Board of Operations, we have some savings. We're looking at moving Mansfield Academy from Route 15 into Browns River. We're going to be doing some partnering and get some efficiencies in the food service program at Underhill Center by joining forces and working together with Browns River and UID, and that totals approximately $166,000. We are getting some rent from our preschool, private preschool providers that are using space in our building. It's been an excellent partnership between the Y and Saxon Hill, and we're hoping that that will be something that we can continue in the years to come, benefit students, benefit their programs, benefit families, and also create a little bit of revenue for the school district. We are in the process of planning to relocate central office to Camels Hump Middle School. We've left the rent and the utilities in the budget so we could help pay for the renovation. We have an architect working on a plan, and I will be updating you through my superintendent's report on that process over the next couple of months. So total savings, I wanted to focus a little bit on that. From FY16 this year to FY17, it's close to $300,000. We set in our articles of agreement that multi-year, that we would save $311,000. So we're really very close to that. When we do realize the savings from central office, we will have achieved that, gone above that mark in FY18. And I do think that we're going to continue to realize savings and efficiencies by looking at the system as a whole and gaining some of the economy of size and scale that we now have. This is the breakdown of the budget. It has the dollar amount and the percentage. This is a little bit different than the last version that we shared with you. I believe the last increase was a 0.6. This is a 0.62. And these are the increases. This is a breakdown. So this gets into some specificity. I won't read it to you, but this is the breakdown in some of the additions and some of the decreases that we talked about in previous slides. The 41 pre-K partnerships. For the high school, we are adding 1 FTE. We have an increase in the overall student population, and that is concentrated in the freshman and sophomore class. They take more classes, and we need more sections. So this is again driven by enrollment. And it has the net changes at the bottom. So these were the actual reductions at Jericho, some paraprofessional support, about 3/4 of a paraprofessional, a half a day in art and a half a day in music. And then Richmond Elementary School, there's a reduction of 2 FTEs and a half a day reduction of the school resource officer, which is combined with Camels Hump Middle School, and Underhill Central Elementary has 1 less teacher for next year and a reduction in unified arts. That's a day of music, and a day of library, and some nurse time is included in that as well. That is a function of a decline in enrollment and a reduction of teachers over the last several years. There's less students. There's also some savings in some supplies from Underhill Central. There's less students and there's less classes, and we don't need as much Unified Arts time. And then Camel's Hump, they have one less teacher that they're going to need next year, and that's based on enrollment as well. Richmond, the 2 FTEs there, one, we did not hire a kindergarten teacher for this year because the enrollment in K was less than we had anticipated. In Camel's Hump, that reduction is also somebody that we did not hire for this year. I do not believe at this time, based on the retirement letters that I've received, that we will need to reduce any people. It is highly unlikely that we will have to do that. So these are reductions that will be filled by attrition. And then the addition of the teacher at Mount Mansfield. So, and those reductions were work between the principal and myself and Bob, taking a look at what the actual class sizes are, the number of students, what the needs are, and what the status quo is currently, and then adjusting accordingly. And the revenues, these are a bit different from the last piece of information that we gave you on revenue for the MMM. This includes all of Mount Mansfield modified, so that includes 512 students in the education spending, and that's a decrease. We received the final special education revenue numbers. That's a significant factor in this. And then special education, that is a bit of an increase as well. And again, that's a function of the final special education revenue that we received from the state, both the percentage that they're going to support and the revenue for our non-intensive and intensive students. The federal and state revenues, that's a bit different as well, and there was a reduction in the transportation grant, and we added a little bit to a huge surplus of $10,000 that we're anticipating right now. So that's the revenue picture. These are the drivers, and this is a chart that you may have seen before. Our equalized pupils, and this is excluding Huntington, is going down, a reduction of about 61 students. We have to separate Huntington 512 and pre-K to 4 to get their tax rate correct. And this is something that the Agency of Education has told us that we must do. The property yield, which Kevin referred to earlier, that formerly was the base ed amount. That is going up. However, we recently, I think it was Wednesday of last week, they reduced what that number is, and I'll talk a little bit about that on the next slide. But that is going up, $411, and that has a suppressing influence on the tax rate. And then the property tax equivalent yield is going up a penny. And then our education spending is going down. And that helps to suppress the tax rate. And then we have the new common level of appraisal numbers currently. That's a slide I will show you. For some of our school districts, the value of their homes is going up in the 3-year average. So what that means is that you have to adjust where you are, your assessment, your common level of appraisals for your houses are up to 100%. And that increases your tax rate. Specifically for Jericho, it was almost 2% that the common level of appraisal needed to be adjusted up to get to 100%. It's really important for me to emphasize that is something we do not have any control over. The school board the administration, the school district has no control over the 3-year rolling average of house sales. But it is a function of how our tax rate is calculated.
John,
Yes.
can you go back to that slide? Can you explain why Huntington 5 to 12 had to be excluded?
We have to take out all of the expenditures and calculate your own rate absent, well, the incentives is we're still getting guidance to do that, and that's what we have done.
Right. This tax rate is for just 3M only, and it's the tax rate that's going to generate the funds for 3M. Huntington will have its own composite tax rate, which will be comprised of the local rate, which is the pre-K 4 plus the 512.
Okay.
So there's a separate calculation that's done based on just the 512
That makes sense.
for everybody, and that's where we derive the 512 rate to be used in that composite calculation.
Okay. Got it.
And this is the calculation. The math has not changed. And again, this is excluding 512. As Bob said, Huntington has to have its own composite tax rate, and we have to separate all of the 512 costs from the pre-K to 12 costs of the towns that are in Triple M. And this has not changed much from prior years, and you can just walk right through the math. Education spending, that is overall spending minus any revenue, state and federal, which the bulk of that is IDA. You take that and you divide it by our equalized pupils, and you get an ed spending per equalized pupil. You then divide that by the property yield, and that lets you know how the percentage that you are above that $9,870. And then you multiply that by the tax rate, and you get an equalized homestead tax rate. And that is $1.54 pre the incentives, and then you apply the incentives. So if you were spending $9,870, your tax rate would be $1. Now that number is a statutory number. It was never defined as this is what you should be spending per pupil. It is a function of the tax rate formula. One thing I'd like to have you look at in this slide is that the tax rate before the incentives is actually going down. And then when you apply the 6 cents, of course we're decreasing by 2. We're saving that 1 penny, so you get an increase of $1.48. Just one piece about the equalized pupils. It's a 2-year average, and the way that they reconciled the preschool numbers that we submitted last year, though Bob and I can't fully understand where all those pupils are. And so that's what we're trying to figure out, because we're funding them, but they're not in our equalized pupil count, and that's where we're hitting the pause button. I did send an email to the Agency of Education today, and they did respond, I guess, before Bob left this evening. So hopefully they'll be able to walk us through the calculation, and we'll be able to validate the data. And this is the estimated tax rates by town. So the incentives are applied pre the adjustment for the common level of appraisal. We included the CLA factor, so that's where you are as compared to full market value. You're either above or you're below. Jericho is below and Richmond is below, and their tax rate is adjusted accordingly. And you can see at the bottom what the influence is on $100,000 worth of home. and what the rate of change is as well. Well, the Huntington, there's an asterisk. They're meeting tomorrow night, and they're looking at some revisions to their budget. So that is, that's a soft number right now. They've got work that they're going to be doing over the next week or so on their budget, so we don't know what the influence of that is until they've determined what their budget looks like.
Just to remind folks, some people ask, why is Bolton's tax rate still so much higher than the other towns that are fully part of 3M? And the tax law says, the merger law says that your tax rate can only go down a certain percentage year over year. If we continue with this trend, it'll take another maybe 2 years before Bolton's before CLA adjustment is equal to that of Jericho, Richmond, and Underhill. Jericho, Richmond, and Underhill have already come to the actual tax rate for the district. Bolton will get there eventually.
Their rate was, this is important to understand, their rate was much higher than everyone else's. And it still is I believe it's the highest rate still. So when you take a look at the tax rate, even with the incentive applied before the common level of appraisal, for the MMM, it's relatively flat. And that's based on the work that was done in the budget and the education spending number that we talked about earlier. And this is the income sensitivity. This chart shows the income sensitivity rate per town. And you basically take that rate and you multiply it by the 50,000 and you get what your tax rate would be, and then you subtract that from the full cost and you get the savings. About 2/3 of the population do get some sort of income sensitivity reduction. So this does influence people in the pocketbook. And then we have our vote on March 1st, 2016. I won't go through these, but then we added some school information for you to take a look at.